Today, we become legends.
So in response to the anonymous averaged out pro player tier list that I made, a lot of people said you should do like a viewer tier list or like an Inters3ct community tier list kind of thing. I thought that'd be pretty interesting. So I sent out the survey that I sent to all the pro players just as like an audience-wide thing for anyone that watches my channel to participate in, and these are the results. So for those who haven't watched that video, which by the way if you haven't you should, it's a pretty interesting insight into the meta and what the pro players think right now. But for those who haven't, the basic idea of this was that I sent out a survey to my audience in this case, asking them to rate every single god in the game from 0 to 10 in terms of meta relevance, with like 10 being the best god in the game, like completely uncontested, and 0 being complete garbage, you're asking to lose if you pick the character. And then obviously I got a ton of responses for that. I got over 500 responses for this one, which is pretty insane. Thanks guys for taking the time out of your day to submit this. And using all 500 of those, I averaged out the overall point score for every single god and created this tier list. The gods are obviously ordered from top to bottom, as they are in any tier list, but also in each tier they're ordered. So for example, in this top tier we have Persephone up here and Heim down here. That means Heim has a lower score in this tier relative to Persephone. So this is the 8 to 9 tier. Persephone will be more like right on the verge of being a 9, and Heim would be right on the verge of being an 8. So yeah, you can read this both from top down and from left to right. So you know, Persephone is the best god in the game according to my audience. And I thought this one would be interesting to take a look at. It's sort of more of a tier list that's based around like what the average player thinks, because I feel like my viewers are pretty average players. You know, you're not on average, of course. Like there will be some players that watch me that are like insane at the game and are grandmasters. There'll also be a ton of really new players that don't really know anything about the game. And since I got over 500 responses for this, there'll be like an average of these that are like probably around gold plat, like the average player. So I think if you are an average player, this is pretty interesting because it's sort of going to be very reflective of what you think and also what you can like play in the meta at like, you know, the middling ranks where a lot of people are and have a lot of success with. So let's get into sort of the analysis of this. So the first thing that I noted is that no gods actually got a 9 or above. As with this tier list made from the data that I sent out from pro players, by the way, you know, watch that video if you haven't watched it, there's a lot of good insights there. 5 gods actually got an above 9 rating. Rama, Nemesis, Yamoja, Amaterasu, and Hebo are like slightly above these 8 to 9 ratings. And yeah, on the viewer tier list, nobody got above a 9 actually. Persephone and Yamoja were incredibly close actually. Let me look up their scores real quick. Yeah, Persephone and Yamoja were both 8.93s on this, so like very, very close to being 9, but not quite. So obviously most of this top tier makes quite a bit of sense. Like I said earlier, these are ordered from left to right as well, so Persephone is more like a 9, Heim is more like an 8, so like this tier kind of scales down in power level. But yeah, Yamoja, Persephone, Nemesis, Rama, and Amaterasu are kind of like widely agreed upon as like the best 5 gods in the game right now. And aside from a slight change of Hebo kind of replacing Persephone in that top 5, that pretty much concurs with what the pro players think. So the average player opinion pretty much follows the pro player opinion. Aside from Hebo and Persephone swapping places a little bit, and of course like the order of them is different. Like Rama was rated as the best god by the pros, Persephone rated as the best god by my average like viewer tier list. Another notable difference is Cthulhu is pretty high up here. You know, Cthulhu's looking like maybe sort of middle of this tier, like an 8.5-ish, whereas like on the pro player tier list he was kind of way down. Yeah, as we can see on the pro player tier list here, he's kind of in the middle of the 7 to 8 tier, so probably around 7.5, whereas on the viewer tier list he was more like an 8.5, so Cthulhu rated quite a bit higher by the average player than by the pros. But honestly, a lot of the gods in this 8 to 9 tier are pretty representative of what I would agree with for like the top meta picks. Interesting to see Tsukuyomi rated so low. I actually agree with this. I think Tsukuyomi is not like top 5 gods in the game, but I expected, you know, based on his release, a lot of people submitting this to just rate him 10 automatically, and he would actually get like one of the top 5 spots. But yeah, rated a little bit lower. And looking at these lower tiers as well, Loki rated as the worst god in the game. That's not surprising. I expected that. He was actually quite a bit lower than the next god. Let me have a look at Loki's score here. So yeah, Loki was rated at about a 2.59, and Arpoash, who's the next god, was rated at 3.34. So yeah, quite a bit lower than the next god there. Arpoash, Fenrir, Bastet makes total sense. These are some of the worst gods in the game. Up in the 4 to 5 tier as well. Pretty much makes sense. I think Odin is maybe slightly underrated here. Like Odin does have some use in the meta. I don't think he deserves to be 4 to 5. I'd rate him like maybe like in the 5 to 6 category. Another interesting thing that I noticed here was that Anubis is actually rated pretty low. I expected Anubis to be rated higher by the average community opinion than by the pros, but actually Anubis is in 5 to 6 here. And if we take a look at the pro player tier list here, Anubis is in 6 to 7. Actually a decent way up, you know, almost halfway through the 6 to 7 tier, so probably around 6.5. Whereas like Anubis, I think got about a 5.9 in the average player tier list, which I didn't expect actually. I expected the pros to value Anubis less because like with his low mobility and countered by anti-heal, stuff like that, the pros know how to deal with him a lot better. But yeah, actually pros rate Anubis higher than the average player. Another interesting difference was Aphrodite's fall off in the eyes of the average player. Aphrodite here right at the top of 6 to 7, so probably like almost a 7 score. Whereas on the pro player tier list here, she's solidly in the 8 to 9 category. That's probably something like an 8.3 or an 8.4. So yeah, Aphrodite's still rated pretty highly by the pros, almost in the top 10 gods here. She's like the number 14 pick here, whereas in the eyes of the average player, Aphrodite has fallen off quite a lot to like a 7-ish. Kuzumbo was also rated in like around the top 15 on the pro player tier list, but obviously rated quite a bit lower on this average player tier list here. Another interesting pick here is Discordia in the viewer tier list is like rated in sort of the middle of the 7 to 8 category, so around a 7.5. Whereas in the pro player tier list, she was rated in like kind of the top of the 5 to 6 category, so like the pro players rate Discordia way lower than the average player does. And I think I actually lean more towards the pros opinion of Discordia here. I think Discordia is actually not amazing and people are overrating her a lot. And one final one I wanted to point out here was Baron Sambi. Baron is rated at like right on the bottom of the 6 to 7 category in the viewer tier list, which is probably like around a 6 or a 6.1. Whereas in the pro player tier list, they rated Baron as like one of the bottom 10 gods in the game in the 3 to 4 category. So the average player has like a much higher opinion of Baron than the pro players, which opposite to the verdict of Discordia, I actually agree more with I think the average player here. I think Baron in like most ranks is actually a pretty solid character, probably more looking like a balanced character than like one of the bottom 10 in the game, which is what the pro players rate him. So I'm actually with my viewers a bit more on the Baron decision. I know I said that was going to be my final point out here, but Geb and Kepri are actually rated super highly on my viewer tier list. They're rated in the 7 to 8 category, Geb on the lower end of it, Kepri on the higher end of it, so you know, around maybe like a 7.2 and a 7.8 respectively. Whereas in the pro player tier list, Geb and Kepri are rated pretty much identically in the middle of the 5 to 6 category. So the average player valuing those shields and reses a lot more than the pro players value them right now. Not entirely sure what the reason for that is, but it's pretty interesting. It's just like some interesting data with these, you know, seeing how they compare, seeing how the average player views the meta versus how the pro players view the meta. Because I think a lot of average players kind of take what the pros do as gospel and will just rate gods like based on what the pros think. But obviously that's not entirely true because like some of these picks are different. It seems like the average player will follow the meta and be in agreement with the pros mostly on like the top and bottom picks. So, you know, obviously these top tiers, Rama, Nemesis, Yamoja, Amaterasu, Hebo, and the bottom picks of like Fenrir, Bastet, Zeus, Loki. Back on the average player tier list here, you can see that, you know, they mostly agree with like these top and bottom picks. You know, Zeus, Nox, Loki, Apwash, Fenrir, Bastet, Persephone, Rama, Nemesis, Yamoja, Amaterasu, like they mostly agree with like the top and bottom picks, but it's in the middle picks where they differ, which is evident in the picks like, you know, Poseidon's rated a lot higher, Discordia rated a lot higher than the pro players would rate them. Obviously Geb and Kepri, like we just talked about, rated a lot higher by the average player base than by the pros. And it just gives some interesting insight into what sort of the average player thinks of the meta, because I'm sure like the majority of you watching this are probably average at the game. Like you're not completely insane. Like for me, for example, I play in like high diamond or masters when I actually try in ranked, so like this tier list is probably less representative of my opinion, and I'm probably more aligned with the pro opinion. But like, I think for most of you watching, this tier list will actually be more representative of what you see in the meta and how you feel things are valued. Like I think Loki being the worst god in the game is the average opinion of most players, whereas like the pros, for example, think Fenrir is the worst god in the game. So there's like a little differences, but for the most part, obviously the meta is the meta and it's there for a reason. You know, most gods that are strong are viewed as strong by like most people. But especially in these middling tiers, there's a lot of difference, so it's pretty interesting to see the differences there. So that's the tier list. Obviously, Persephone, best god in the game, rated by my viewers. Loki, worst god in the game, rated by my viewers. And compared to the pro player tier list, we have Rama being the best god and Fenrir being the worst god. But in general, they're pretty much in agreement. And if you haven't seen the video for this pro player tier list, I highly recommend watching it. It gives a really interesting insight onto the meta based on what the pro players think, because it was completely anonymously submitted by all the pro players that I sent this out to. And so you're not getting any kind of biased opinion of them trying to like hide what they truly think is the best because they want to use it in the SPL. This is completely anonymous and averaged out, so this is like the average opinion of what the pro players think, which I do think has a lot of value because they are the best in the game for a reason, and they have coaches that study the game and tell them what's good for a reason. You know, they play it competitively, they get paid to do it, they compete in tournaments for huge amounts of money for being good at the game. So I think there's definitely value in what you can find from pro player tier list, as well as obviously the average player tier list that we've looked at today. But yeah, if you have any other ideas for interesting videos like this, then let me know, and I'll catch you guys in the next one later on. Have a great day, and peace out, you nerds.